In today's lesson, we are continuing the idea from our last lesson. This is part B of trig functions on the unit circle. So what I have in front of you, don't need to write down. You already have all this written down in your notes. So this is just kind of reviewing. Coterminal angles is just the adding 360 and adding 2 pi or subtracting. Knowing when your trig functions are positive or negative depending on the quadrant, knowing your special right triangles, and then in the last video, these reference angles. So what you do to find your reference angles in each quadrant. So in today's lesson, the idea is I'll give you this trig function to evaluate. If you're looking at the unit circle, your answers are right on your unit circle. So that's pretty easy. But what we're trying to do is get these answers without looking at the unit circle. So either you have the unit circle memorized, or we use all of these tools to get the same answer. All right, our first example is cosine of 120 degrees. So either visualizing that unit circle or following these steps. First thing you always want to do is ask yourself if 120 degrees falls within the interval between 0 and 360. And in this case, boom, it does. So we don't have to worry about that. Next, you always want to check which quadrant it is in. So we know it's in quadrant 2. All right, so now in quadrant 2, if we look over here, cosine is negative. So I know my final answer is going to be negative. And then in quadrant 2, to find the reference angle, I'm going to do this 180 minus 120, which is 60. So I'm using 60 degrees on my right triangle. So cosine of 60 is adjacent over hypotenuse 1 over 2, but we just have to remember that it is negative. And now having the unit circle memorized, maybe you in your head knew that at 120 degrees, cosine is the x value, which is negative 1/2. Okay, next example is sine of 5 pi over 6. First thing you want to do is it in the interval from 0 to 2 pi? And it is, so we're good there. Next thing, which quadrant is 5 pi over 6 in? This is also in quadrant 2. So now, what do we know about quadrant 2? Quadrant 2, sine is positive. So my final answer will be positive. And in quadrant 2, it's this pi minus theta. So pi minus 5 pi over 6 is going to be, well, this would be 6 pi over 6. So that's just pi over 6. And pi over 6, we should just know, is 30 degrees. So now 30 degrees is my reference angle, and I'm doing sine, which is opposite over hypotenuse, 1/2, and it's positive. Or maybe you have your unit circle memorized and you know that 5 pi over 6 sine is the y value, which is positive 1/2. All right, so now tangent of 5 pi over 3. First thing, let's make sure, is that in the interval from 0 to 2 pi? Yes, it is. And then, okay, which quadrant is 5 pi over 3? That will be in quadrant 4. So what is happening in quadrant 4? Tan is negative, so my final answer will be negative. Quadrant 4, to get the reference angle, I need to do 2 pi minus theta. So 2 pi minus 5 pi over 3. So that would be 6 pi over 3 minus 5 pi over 3 is just pi over 3, which we know is 60 degrees. So 60 degrees is my reference angle, and tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that's square root of 3, and remember it's negative. All right, and if instead we're thinking unit circle, well, here's 5 pi over 3, here's x and y, and tangent is y divided by x. So negative square root of 3 over 2 dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2, so you will get negative square root of 3. All right, so now let's do secant of negative 135 degrees. First thing is check, is that on the interval from 0 to 360? It's not, so let's find the coterminal angle by doing negative 135 plus 360. And when you do that, you should get 225 degrees. So really what we're going to find is secant of 225 degrees. But what quadrant is that? 225, that's in quadrant 3. So what's happening in quadrant 3? Here we have, okay, well, let's first secant, that is 1 over cosine, and cosine is negative, so my answer will be negative. And in quadrant 3, to find the reference angle, I do theta minus 180. 225 minus 180 is 45 degrees. So now on this special right triangle, let's see, secant, if cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, then secant is the reciprocal, hypotenuse over adjacent. So of 45 degrees, square root of 2 over 1 is square root of 2, and the answer is negative, so negative square root of 2. Okay, and if we were to use the unit circle, well, we'd have to still know that negative 135 is coterminal with 225. So 225, we have to know that secant corresponds with cosine, which is x, and then we know it's the reciprocal, so it would be negative 2 over the square root of 2, and then we'd have to rationalize the denominator, so that's negative 2 square root of 2 over 2, and those cancel, so negative square root of 2. So using this method, using your unit circle method. But the idea is still, even though we're using the unit circle, the idea is, but can you do this without looking at the unit circle? Which is easier, to visualize this in your head or to have all of this knowledge memorized? And here is our last example. We're going to do cotangent of 570 degrees. So is 570 in this interval? No. So let's find a coterminal angle by doing 570 minus 360, which is 210. 210 is in quadrant 3, and in quadrant 3, let's see, cotangent, okay, that relates to tangent, so that's positive. And in quadrant 3, we would do theta minus 180. So 210 minus 180 is 30 degrees. So 30 degrees is my reference angle. And let's see, if tangent is opposite over adjacent, cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So square root of 3 over 1 is square root of 3 positive. But instead, if we were using our unit circle, let's see, we would still have to find this coterminal. 210 is right here. Okay, so here's my x, here's my y. And now cotangent is x over y. So in this case, square root of 3 over 2. And instead of dividing by negative 1/2, I will multiply by the reciprocal of negative 2 over 1. 2's cancel, 2 negatives make a positive, square root of 3. So there is your lesson. It's that idea of, yay, we memorized the unit circle. However, in my opinion, I think sometimes visualizing this, if you don't always have this to look at, these, in my opinion, are actually easier to memorize. And this is kind of making sense of that unit circle. But we'll kind of practice both ways and get the hang of all of it. Good luck with your lesson.